This is a military convoy. Do not get closer. We will open fire. Stop.
It's Lockdown 3 here in the UK, and we're going to be talking about a new horror movie called COVID-21 Lethal Virus. This one is directed and co-written by Daniel Hernandez Torrado, and I believe it's a Spanish production, although it is spoken in English. And the story here is one you've seen many times before. It's a zombie apocalypse style movie. So we have this mysterious virus which is turning every kind of like civilian into a flesh-eating ghoul, a zombie, and it's just up to a handful of survivors to escape this zombie menace. And it really focuses on two people. This doctor, who may well hold the key to a cure for the virus, is on the run after a zombie attack, and she teams up with a sort of loner who is just trying to kind of survive, and together they kind of have to kind of traverse the landscape, dealing with both hordes of zombies plus some less friendly locals as well, in hopes of getting to a certain destination, in the idea being that maybe there will be a light at the end of the tunnel. Now, let's talk about it in a little bit more detail about what works. Now, it's obviously tying in, as I expect many films are, to the global pandemic, of course, with the coronavirus, the COVID-19. Now, to be honest with you, this movie, I suspect, and I don't know, this is speculation, was never made with the intention of being a COVID-related film. I suspect it was more or less finished, but not released. And then they've basically filmed a few kind of intro scenes with news reports linking it to the the coronavirus, really, ultimately to add that extra layer of shock value, because the film itself doesn't have anything to do with the actual coronavirus. It has no real impact on the story. It doesn't really kind of refer to anything that's ever happened in the pandemic. And in actual fact, the origin of this particular virus, according to the movie, was actually due to climate change, because the ice caps have melted in this, and they've discovered a prehistoric virus which has come out of the ice, and that is the problem with this kind of zombie. That's the origin of the zombie plague. Nothing really to do with a coronavirus as such. Again, so it's just, in my opinion at least, this was like a zombie movie that was either completed or near to completion, and they've just kind of filled a few extra scenes, plopped it at the beginning to kind of tie it into the current pandemic. It isn't the first one. This isn't the first zombie film that I've seen that's kind of trying to tie into the pandemic. In fact, it's not even the second zombie film that I've seen that's trying to do that. So, I would expect more of the same, to be honest. That being said, what can we say in the positive column for this movie? Okay, so a couple of things I will say that I think that did work on a positive scale here. Number one, there are a couple of scenes for what is obviously a very low budget movie, where we do have quite a lot of extras on the scene. Now, I've seen some low budget zombie films, and you only ever see a handful of people on screen at any one time. I will say, at least on this production, there is, we get quite a good zombies en masse at times. So it kind of gives it, a more of a dramatic feel, where we see, hordes of zombies. I mean, we're not talking like the things maybe you see on The Walking Dead, maybe, but nonetheless, more than kind of like a handful of zombies that you will see in some of the kind of low budget productions. There is a decent amount of like props and things here. There's like a military convoy, things like that. So there's, costumes in regards to kind of like the soldiers, things like this. There's a variety in locales, and some of the scenes, I would say, certainly in the first half of the movie, I think they do drop off in the second half, but there are some scenes in the first half of the movie that I think the cinematography is also quite good. The movie's relatively fast-paced. There's kind of quite a lot. It doesn't really go too long before we kind of get an action sequence. So, you know, it's certainly kind of action-packed. It's an action-packed, low-budget zombie film. But what can we say in the other column? Let's discuss. This, to me, unfortunately, is somewhat of a soulless, generic zombie film. There's been so many of these, and I often see, are zombies overexposed? I think low-budget zombie films are overexposed because it really just feels like another low-budget zombie film without really having anything to set it apart. The story is so sparse, you know, considering this is meant to be a COVID, like I've said, this is why I think this has nothing to do with COVID originally. There could have been clever ways that you could have a zombie movie really tying into the COVID sort of situation and stuff like that, and it doesn't. But it doesn't try to do anything clever with the premise that it does have in regards to climate change and things like that. It's mentioned, and then that's the end of it. And then it just goes into, you know, run and shoot, run and shoot, run and shoot. So that's the problem there. I think the acting is not brilliant. There are some actors here that are clearly not speak, you know, English isn't their first language. As such, the performances are somewhat kind of ropey, even with our female lead who seems to have an English accent. So not great. Our central two characters, I've got to say, are quite weak in regards to acting ability, unfortunately. Their characters are also very thinly sketched out. We get virtually no characterization with both these characters. The lines are quite poorly delivered, so we simply don't care. We simply don't care about these characters. There's just not an attempt here to kind of humanise them or have dialogue in a kind of a realistic kind of manner that makes you care about these people. Although I think some of the movie is well shot, I think, again, in the second half, I feel that it really does kind of buckle under the strain of its low budget. There's some scenes here that just seem like they're quite poorly kind of put together. The zombies themselves, I'll be honest with you, aren't particularly impressive, despite the fact we do have quite a lot of them. And there are one or two that I think the makeup does look good, but there's the ones with like painted on abs and things like this, and it's just like, oh, jeez. And it's just like the typical thing where, again, this is a little pet peeve here I have of low-budget zombie films, where people are having like tatty clothes, but they're clearly just clothes that someone's taken a pair of scissors to and things like this. So it doesn't look like it's realistic, degraded clothes. It looks like someone's just gone like this with a pair of scissors. The actual action as well is so uninteresting. You know, CGI sort of muzzle flashes, lots of some CGI blood. It just boils down to a very, very, very generic zombie film with not interesting characters. Now, there are plenty of low-budget zombie films. Although I don't think this is necessarily a horrible film, but it's also below average to me because it fails on having interesting characters. You can have a somewhat kind of generic zombie film, but if you have interesting characters that we as an audience care about and we as an audience kind of like can get behind and kind of associate with, then, to be honest with you, you can kind of rise above them. They're mediocre film necessarily, but you don't have that here. You have very poorly developed characters who aren't acted very well. And then the actual story itself is so basic. It doesn't offer any interesting insights into the world of the virus. And again, like I said, I think, okay, maybe it can't tell you about the real coronavirus. I think this movie had nothing to do with it. But in the story that it does tell you, like I've said, we could have had things to do with the climate change. They could have looked to have gone to a colder climate, something like this, wherever it might have been. There's nothing done with it. It's just a very much like a point A to point B storyline with just a few generic action sequences that are somewhat underlit and not particularly well choreographed. So, to be honest with you, I don't think this is a bad zombie film in a respect that it's not one of the ones where it's just terrible, it's unwatchable, but it's so just by the numbers, and I'll chip it down a bit because I think I say the performances and things like that as well. I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 10, and I actually think that's quite generous if I'm being honest with you. So 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.